The talk's about advanced driving. Now, I should point out to you straight away that my background is, I've been driving since I was 17, so that's about 4 or 5 years. And I've been involved with the Institute of Advanced Motorists since, just look at my qualification, since 2003, when I felt it'd be something to aid my personal development. And I'd always fancied myself as a reasonable driver, but I wanted to try and prove it. And I joined the IAM group in Chigwell, and I was coached by an elderly woman. And I thought this is going to be an absolute disaster. And boy, did she open my eyes up to what advanced driving is all about. Extremely progressive in her own driving. She never let me lose my concentration for a moment. And I found it a thoroughly enjoyable experience. It took me about 6 months from starting the driving course to actually obtaining my pass qualification. Now, I know there's a couple of you here who have done advanced driving, and I take my hat off to you. I hope you still find this of interest, but for those people who haven't done this advanced driving, I should point out that when I coach people, when I'm sitting in the car with them, and I also do this for motorcyclists as well, I'm an advanced instructor and a national observer for the Institute of Advanced Motorists for car and bike. I get asked lots of questions. What should I do when this happens? What should I do when that happens? And there's no fixed answer. There's no rigid rules. Circumstances on the road change all the time. What may be a good idea for one situation may be a terrible idea for another situation. But in fact, the answer I give every time is, it depends. The only rule that is fixed is that driving, whether you're a non-advanced driver or an advanced driver, is that it must be safe, always safety first, and legal. Anything else is generally acceptable. A couple of facts for you. I'm tailoring this talk mostly for people of the current group's age. I'd say older drivers. There could be things that you find particularly relevant. If it's not relevant, just close your ears, 30 years ago, only 1 in 3 men and 1 in 20 women aged over 70 held a driving license. Today, 3 in 4 men and 1 in 3 women over 70 are licensed to drive. And over the next 20 years, it's expected that the number of male drivers will double and that of female drivers will treble. There'll be more people of all ages on our roads. This causes some people a lot of concern. They come along to advanced driving. I want to be safer. I can't cope with the traffic. I'm very nervous. Can you help? And we can cater for people of all standards before they start to do an advanced course. Now, older drivers, are they safe or unsafe? You may have your own opinion about it. Generally, they are not unsafe. In fact, they're safer than younger drivers. However, age-related decline in mental and physical abilities, coupled with age-related frailty, can make older drivers more likely to be involved in a crash and obviously more vulnerable to serious injuries. Older drivers self-regulate their safety generally by adapting their driving patterns through lifestyle changes or by avoiding driving in situations where they're uncomfortable, such as when it's dark or when it's wet or if a motorway journey has to be undertaken. A couple of notes here. More than 300,000 pensioners over the age of 65 have points on their licenses, according to new research figures obtained by the IAM Road Smart, who I'm a member of. This is actually 25 times more over 65s with points than drivers in their teens. They're quite staggering figures. The IAM's data shows that around 304,000 over 65 have such penalty points on their licenses, compared with just 12,000 teenage drivers. On the face of it, these figures would suggest older drivers commit more motoring offences, but the figures don't actually take that into account. The number of license holders in the age ranges or the number of points held. However, despite restricting their driving and adopting a safer driving style, older drivers are more prone to making errors that can lead to a crash. This is particularly evident at junctions, on 60 to 70-mile-an-hour roads, and in single car incidents when no other car is involved. This is where the benefit of advanced driving instruction comes in. It can help a driver to become more aware and observant as a motorist, and at the same time increase their driving enjoyment, which many motorists lost years ago. Now, I want to start by making something clear. I most likely haven't seen you drive on the road or been driven by you, so I can't comment on your ability. Therefore, if I talk about you, I don't actually mean you. I expect that you've been driving since you passed whatever sort of a test you took many, many years ago. And it's even possible you may have legally obtained a driving license without ever having done what we now call a DVSA test. You may have been in the army, you may have had some particular situation with government work that you didn't need one. So I would presume that you've developed some very useful skills over the years that you've been using for a long time. How you're using those skills, I don't know. But with advanced driving techniques, it's quite likely that those skills can be developed further, and new skills and ideas can turn your driving from an average driver into an advanced driver, whatever your age. But it doesn't happen overnight. So a quick show of hands, if you like, don't be shy. Who here thinks they are an above average driver? Don't be shy, don't be shy. Okay, in surveys that have been done in the UK over the years, when asked this question, 81% of respondents have answered that they consider themselves to be above average. Now, it's pretty obvious that not everyone can be above average. So the majority who say they are above average, the chances are they're basing it on distorted observations. Now, we notice bad driving. It's really easy to see. When someone cuts you up, tailgates you, pulls out in front of you, you probably assume that driver is bad. Below average, certainly not as good as you. But what if that driver had a momentary lapse in concentration and he's generally good? It doesn't matter. The fact is, you've made a judgment of that driver, probably for the first and last time you'll ever see them. So first impressions count. If you were that bad driver who just pulled out, cut someone up, tailgated them, how would you feel if someone regarded you as a bad driver? The chances are you'd say you had a lapse in concentration. The other driver was driving too slow, or they changed lanes at the last minute. We're often too eager to present mitigating circumstances. Now, nothing generally all of a sudden happens with a good driver, most of the time. As a result, good driving mostly goes unnoticed. Were you aware that that driver in front of you had realized you were driving too close and so increased their distance from the car in front to compensate? Were you aware that the driver at a blind junction took a little longer to take a look and so avoided pulling out in front of you? What about that driver on the motorway who did a blind spot check and saw you sat there but didn't pull out in front of you? The fact is, we see the bad stuff. We don't see the good stuff. It just happens. So making a judgment based on good or bad about someone's driving ability, people make the wrong judgment because they have distorted observations. This in itself leads to a lot of people saying they're above average. Now, a good driver is aware of their environment and other drivers. They drive with a quiet efficiency. They have a systematic way of dealing with the road conditions. They observe, they anticipate and plan. Useful initials of each of those words, OAP, good thing to remember. They avoid reacting at the last minute to things. Instead, they anticipate and often know what another driver is going to do, even before the driver does it. In the Institute of Advanced Motorists, we like to say that the mark of an advanced driver is that they drive the same road every day as if they've never driven it before. And they will drive a road they've never been on before as if they drive it every day. Now take a moment and think, what does that actually mean? I'm going to ask you, well, in fact, I'll tell you, to me, it means that the road I drive down every day from my house, I'm very familiar with it. I know accidents often happen within a few miles of where people live. They're so familiar with the roads. They go past cars that are parked every day knowing they'll never come out because they never have come out. But that one day they don't pay attention will be the day the car comes out. They can drive along country roads and they're treated as though it's a road they've been along frequently, even though they haven't. Now I'm going to share the screen for a moment. I've got a little quiz. If you've got a pencil and paper, you might want to join in. I'll go through some answers at the end. So just give me a second. 1 second, please. Short quiz. Okay. You can see these questions. If not, I'm reading them out aloud in any case. Have any of you, since you obtained your driving license, had any further driver training at all? Even if you had further training, can you give the correct answer to the following questions? Does anyone have a copy of the highway code that they purchased within the last 5 years? That's a yes or no answer. Do you know what ABS is? And if so, write the answer down. Have you been shown how to deal with ABS if it is activated on your car, if you've got it fitted? Do you know what the vanishing point is in relation to driving? What does the highway code say about stopping safely? What's the rule for safe distancing between moving vehicles in dry weather on an A or B class road or a motorway? How much space should you leave between you and the car in front? What actually is a dual carriageway? What is the speed limit for a car on a dual carriageway compared to a motorway?
60 and 70.
You're too quick, John. Can you slow down?
Absolutely. I'll leave that there for a moment in any case, and I can put the questions up again.
You've unmuted yourself.
I'm unmuted.
Mute yourself.
The other questions: what's the rule for safe distancing? What is a dual carriageway? And what is the speed limit for a car on a dual carriageway compared to a motorway? Everybody happy with those? You can unmute to answer. Okay, can I have any answers for those questions? How many of you have got a copy of the highway code that you bought within the last 5 years?
That's the one I got from my driving course.
Well, that's why I asked that question, because it's highly uncommon. But it should be common. You should have a look at it. There are things in there which could open your eyes about what you should do on the road. And in fact, the highway code could be used against you if an incident happened on the road and police were involved. They could cite a broken rule that you've done as evidence of not driving safely or correctly?
Never go to court without a copy of the highway code. That's very important. And if you're represented by a solicitor, make sure the solicitor knows the highway code.
Absolutely. But I was going to say the first thing to do is, as you said, not go to court. Secondly, make sure your solicitor's there, even if he hasn't got a copy of the highway code. But it is an important read. It's useful. Doesn't cost much, and it will look very different to the copy you've got in your attic or loft.
Exactly.
You can also get it online for free.
Okay, even better. Thank you for that.
Yes,
So just
that's
search
where I
online and you should be able to get hold of it then.
Yeah.
Okay, do you know what ABS is? Okay,
Automatic braking system.
who said that?
Barry.
Barry said that. Okay. Any other answers to that question?
Carol? Assisted brake system, right, Carol said.
That's what I said.
What was that, Gerald?
Carol said assisted brake system.
Right, okay. Well, it actually stands for
Anti-locking.
anti-lock braking system.
Anti-lock brake system.
Yes,
Anti-lock brake.
anti-lock brake system. Now, this is perhaps more important than just knowing what ABS stands for. Is have you been shown how to deal with ABS if it's activated on your car, if you have it fitted? So this is something really important. Yes, Sally?
How do I know if I have it?
Well, your handbook, which is that book you've never read in the...
But I do read it. I do read it out, so
Okay.
use the seats.
If your car's been built in the last 10 years, it probably has got anti-lock braking system, and might even be with some older models as well. But it should say when you start the car or put the key in the ignition, there's very often a symbol that comes up, which may be a steering wheel, which shows airbag, but it might also show anti-ABS on there as well. But your handbook will tell you whether or not it's fitted, and you may have, yeah, I'll let you know about how you experience it in any case.
That's
So-
something I need to read.
Pardon?
That's something I need to read, is the handbook.
It's a good idea, but it's not always essential, but you probably learn something about your vehicle if you do. So
Yes.
Anti-lock braking system, a lot of advanced drivers have never used anti-lock braking system except for testing, because they're generally looking far enough ahead of the road so that they don't need to brake suddenly. If you're on a surface that could be very slippery, ABS in some cases may just happen automatically, but when you brake. But basically, it's a system of dabbing the brakes on and off in rapid succession. You can do this by cadence braking, and it's what people used to do before anti-lock braking systems were built. And that just means pumping the pedal each time very, very quickly. And that allows the wheels to continue moving at a very, very slow pace. With anti-lock braking, it happens incredibly quickly, and you would notice that it's been activated because your foot brake would feel very, very strong juddering. It's like somebody's hitting the foot brake very, very hard. But when that's done, what happens is people who haven't been shown how to use ABS, they take their foot off the brake, which is the worst thing that you can do. You should leave it on until you have either stopped or negotiated your way around the hazard. So don't be frightened if you jam on the brakes and they start juddering. That shows the ABS is actually working. And on a lot of cars, there will be an indicator on the dashboard to say ABS, so you know it's actually been
I just tend
activated.
to pump the brakes.
Pardon?
I just tend to pump the brakes.
Yeah, well, that's pumping the brake is braking, but that's not the anti-lock braking system.
Yeah.
Okay, and next question I asked was, do you know what the vanishing point is in relation to driving? And I would expect at least Gary, Gerald and Paul to know what they are. And Mrs. Saffer, what's the, unmute yourself, Paula Saffer.
I should hope I know what the limit point is.
Well, we'll find out. I'll get to that in a
You
moment.
find
Paul.
out.
I'll get to that in a moment. So Paula, what's the vanishing point?
I probably can't describe it very clearly, but it's when you're driving down the road and it's where the inside of the road and the outside sort of converge. And at that point, that's the vanishing point?
Yes, that's correct. It's where the road actually seems to vanish. And the reason I mention this is because it's a technique, an advanced technique that drivers use to gauge the speed at which they can go round a bend. Now, anybody can go round a bend slowly, but the art of advanced driving is to have a progressive and smooth drive. Now, progressive means making the best use of available speed. So if an advanced driver is on a road with a 50-mile-an-hour limit and the road is clear, he would aim to drive at 50 miles an hour. If the conditions are bad or there's traffic, that wouldn't be feasible and it would be illegal. Same applies to a bend, not with 50 miles an hour, but you can take any bend at a very low speed. But the art in advanced driving is to take it at the most appropriate and progressive speed. And by using the limit point, the vanishing point, as it's also known, you see where the road is coming towards you because the 2 points of the road are meeting and vanishing, and then you can gauge your speed accordingly. So I'll come back to that in a separate part. So what does the highway code say about stopping safely? That was the other question. Any volunteers for an answer?
Slow down.
Yeah, but stopping safely could mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. What it means is that you should be able to stop safely on your side of the road in the distance you can see to be clear. That's what it means. So if you can't stop safely in the distance ahead of you that you can see clear, then you're not really stopping safely. Now, if you're coming to a bend and you're approaching it very quickly, you should be able to stop in that distance between you and the vanishing point, which I just mentioned. If you can't, you will not be able to make the bend particularly safely. You might not be able to make it at all, in fact.
You should certainly get into second gear.
You can do, but we say brakes are for braking and gears are for going. So we use our brakes to slow and we use the gears to go. Okay. What's the rule for safe distancing between moving vehicles in dry weather on an A or B class road or a motorway? Any suggestions?
Depends.
It depends. That's what I normally say. But what is the answer?
On an ordinary road, 30 feet for a motorway don't know.
Right, so that's not really a kind of a rule, is it? 30 feet doesn't help. Some people don't know how far 30 feet is. They may be driving a truck that's 30 feet long. They may be driving a car. Yes, Sally?
Carsworth, the distance of a car. 2
Carsworth.
cars between me and the car in front.
Yeah, well, a car's worth, supposing you're driving a Nissan Micra or you're driving your Rolls Royce that you keep hidden in that garage of yours.
The Rolls Royce worth in my Micra.
Right, okay, so what we tend to do now, or how we would teach you, and you would probably see this in the highway code, is we use a method of counting time. So we would say 2 seconds. So when the car in front of you passes a particular, let's say a point at the side of the road, a post or a marker of some sort, if you count 2 seconds before you hit that point, then you know you've got a safe gap. Now, you've probably been on motorways where they have these chevrons on the road, and it normally tells you, keep 2 chevrons apart.
Yeah.
Now that two chevrons, I don't know how they calculate it, I must say, but that 2 chevrons is 2 seconds. And it doesn't really matter what speed you're going at, but if you're keeping 2 chevrons apart, you will be a safe distance. That distance will account for your thinking time, reaction time, applying the brakes and the car coming to a stop.
But what about speed? Because you know, speed indicates, you know, if you're going faster, you're going to need more time to stop.
you've got 2 seconds, which is quite ample at that speed. If you're going to react, if you don't react to the car stopping in front, it doesn't matter what speed they're going at.
One of the beautiful things about time is time doesn't change. So the faster you go, the time it takes you is still 2 seconds. The slower you go, it's still 2 seconds.
Yes.
So the speed is irrelevant.
Yeah. It doesn't, the 2 second rule doesn't really apply when you're in traffic or on going around about 30 miles an hour. That's why I mentioned on an A or B class road or a motorway where cars are moving. You'll find 2 seconds gives you a much better gap than working out any distance of car lengths. And in fact, you've only got to be driving around a country road in this part of the world where you can see cars all bunched together. Very often these cars are less than half a second apart. If one of them, the one at the front stops, the others will hit him. If you're 2 seconds back, you've got plenty of time to react to the cars in front slowing down. So it's a very useful rule. What I also tell people is that that's the rule for driving in the dry. Now in the wet, what often happens to your braking distance?
Skid.
What was that?
Skid.
It slows.
It's, well, yes, your car is likely to slide a lot more. So you need more time between yourself and the car in front. So you should double that braking distance. There's a saying, only a fool breaks the 2 second rule when it's dry. But when it pour, make it 4. Nice and easy to remember. So 4 seconds when it's wet, 2 seconds when it's dry. That's why it all depends. Is it dry? Is it wet? Are you happy going at a particular speed? You know, there are times I'll be on a motorway and the idea of doing 70 miles an hour is just too risky because of the way other people are driving. So you have to tailor your driving to the situations. Now, I asked another question. What is a dual carriageway? Did anybody want to proffer an answer? Julian.
Well, you shouldn't find cars coming in the opposite direction to you.
I don't want cars coming the opposite direction when I'm driving down my road, Jeff. That's not really what I'm looking for.
Well, that's not a dual carriageway.
So what is the definition of a dual carriageway?
Separation of the two roads.
Absolutely.
It's got 2 lanes either side.
Yes, if you've got, if you have a barrier between your lane and the other lane, then you're on a dual carriageway. And it could be you're on a dual carriageway that has got 3 lanes. It's not just 2, and it could even, in some cases, be 1 lane. But the main thing is there's a physical barrier between you and the traffic on the other side of the road. Now, the reason it's important to know that is because if you are on a motorway, where it is technically a dual carriageway, the speed limit, which I asked you about,
70.
is it going to be the same?
60.
I think 60.
60, I would say.
Any other suggestions?
50 and 70.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, you're not right. It's 70 miles an hour for a motorway or a dual carriageway if the posted sign is national speed limit. So when you get to a road that is a dual carriageway but is not designated as a motorway, it's a 70 miles an hour road unless it says 50 or 40 or 60 as the local authority wants to determine it. Now, it could be that a situation occurs where you need to be doing 70 miles an hour because of situations on the road. You need to know that you're not going to break the law, and those speed limits are shown in the highway code. That question doesn't apply necessarily to people who are driving vans or buses or lorries. They have different, or whether you're towing a caravan, they have different speed limits. So these are things that advanced driver training helps and coaches you in to develop your skills on the ever-changing and often chaotic roads that we're faced with every day. The more information you have in your armory, the better you are able to deal with what's going on. So if you're driving on a dual carriageway and you're in the, let's say, lane number 2, and a car's coming up behind you doing 70 miles an hour, and you're only doing 50 miles an hour because you think that's the speed limit, you might start thinking that that guy behind you is a lunatic and shouldn't be doing what he's doing and it's against the law. Well, that's when you have to take a reality check. So here's a bit of a shocker for you. How do you know what you don't know? If you've never had driver training since you got your driving license, you may have had hundreds of thousands of miles under your belt and feel above average. I know not everybody said they felt above average, but I'm sure some of you that didn't answer do feel above average. But until you get shown your errors and bad habits, how can you possibly know? So I've trained many experienced drivers and got them to pass through the advanced test. And they've spent years on the road. And I've often been surprised by the way they drive. I've even been asked to take a few driving instructors who teach people how to pass the DVSA test. And I've been even more surprised that sometimes their own driving strategy is way below what would be required to pass the advanced driving test. Indeed, very often those driving instructors go for advanced training because they need to improve their driving skills. And in fact, one instructor I had said to me that he drives 100,000 miles a year. And I said, and how many of those miles are with you sitting in the driving seat? He said, very few. So it wasn't a surprise to me that his own driving ability wasn't very good. He was a very good instructor, but as far as his own driving was concerned, it was a different story. So in many cases, because of errors of judgment that drivers make, they may be rewarded with a near miss by pure luck in a few inches. And you've probably seen on the road somebody driving like a hooligan, cuts in front, just misses another car, and he lives to tell the tale. But they tend to think that's going to happen every time, and it won't. They don't have the skill. I'm not talking about driving instructors there. Yeah. So what can advanced driving do for you? It can give you a system that will prepare you so that nothing all of a sudden happens to you. You'll always be in the safest position on the road, aware of what's happening all around you, and get you through traffic quicker than ever before, without going over the speed limit and without upsetting other drivers. Looking ahead, planning what you're going to do and what other cars are going to do. Okay, so you ask, John, what sort of a system do you have in mind? And how would it help? Well, that's a great question. The answer is the system of motor car control. That's a system that was developed by the police, the UK police, which gives you a method of dealing with a constantly changing driving environment and allows you time to react to hazards. Does anybody know what a hazard is?
Somebody jumps in the road.
Speak up.
It's a warning.
You don't know what a hazard is?
It's a warning.
Anything unexpected. Anything unexpected.
Okay, yeah, that's reasonably good. So a hazard is anything that is an actual or potential danger, which could be something unexpected. Now, the system of car control is a way of approaching and negotiating hazards that's methodical, safe, and shouldn't leave anything to chance. It involves careful observation, early anticipation and planning, and a systematic use of the controls of your vehicle to maintain stability in all situations. If your car's not stable, it could come off the road. It could turn over. You might have a problem on a corner and lose control. We try and keep all four wheels on the ground all the time. And the system takes into account the fact that hazards fluctuate. They come singly, they come in clusters, they overlap, and they change all the time. And this system takes account of the continual flux or change. I'm just going to share another little image. Oops, here we go. This is the system, IPSCA. Well, what does IPSCA stand for? I think those that have done the advanced driving will know, but it stands for information, position, speed, gear, and acceleration. Now, that's been made into like a little chart, which shows you here, if you're looking at the screen and can see it clearly, that it shows the information phase, position, speed, gear, and acceleration. And we might consider this as showing us how to deal with a hazard. Gathering information runs throughout the whole system. And at any time when something is done during this phase, you can go back to the beginning and reassess. So I'll give you an example of how this system actually works. Go with me a sec. Supposing we come across a hazard, a common hazard. A large fridge freezer is in the road ahead of you. I'm sure you've all come across this. And even if you haven't now, you might do anytime soon. Using information gathered from looking ahead and all around us, we decide what position on the road we should consider as being safe. So we've got the I for information, P for position. You know what's happening around you, choose a good position. What might be safe for me, you might not consider safe, and you'd have your own choice. We adjust our speed, and that normally means reducing our speed, not necessarily by braking, maybe just by taking your foot off the pedal. And we adjust our speed so we can safely negotiate the fridge without the cars behind us running into us. We would change gear downwards to give the car the required amount of power to maneuver safely. This wouldn't necessarily happen with you doing anything in an automatic car, but it's what the car itself would choose to do when you reduce the speed. There are occasions when driving an automatic car that you may want to physically use the manual option on the car, such as if you're on a very steep hill and you're going down and need to control and you don't want to have the brakes on all the time. So then, once we've driven around this fridge freezer, we consider accelerating back to normal speed. At any time, something might change. New information may come in. Then we have to reconsider again. Behind the fridge freezer, for instance, there may be a young child playing with a football. It's very common around here. And as a result, I have to again evaluate, change my position again, change my speed, change my gear, and then when it's all done, I go out the way. Now, a normal situation really would be a hazard such as a roundabout or a junction or a bend. But the system is used in the same way to handle it, providing it's done safely. It's always a good idea to keep your vehicle moving unless you really need to stop.
John?
Unnecessary stopping, as far as advanced drivers are concerned, is generally avoided when it comes to dealing with hazards.
What about the bicycle hazard?
Bicycle hazard?
If you're going along the road on the Epping New Road and there are bicycles and there's traffic coming towards you, that's for me always a hazard.
That is a major hazard. It's a very good point. The hazard there is that also it's shown in the highway code and in some of the advanced books. You have to allow for the fact that a bicycle may wobble. It may fall over. It may hit a pothole. You should always give a bicycle as much room as you would give as if it was a car. So it's not a bad thing to wait until cars coming the other way have got out the way before you pass them. But there are many occasions when people have ample room to get past a bike, but they're just frightened. And that's just a confidence thing, really. Okay, wait a second. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it's always a good idea to try and keep your car moving. The technical thing as far as this goes is actually because it needs more power to move a stationary vehicle than to keep it from moving. And this is to do with Newton's first law of motion. More fuel is used to get a car going than to keep it moving. To stop a moving car to deal with a hazard and then start it again requires more work from you and from your car's engine. So an advanced driver will take the information of what's happening around them and adjust their speed so they don't need to brake or stop. They keep the wheels moving, they don't affect the stability of the car, still safe. And by using the accelerator pedal judiciously, it makes a very big difference in their driving, keeps them nice and smooth. An advanced driver might consider the accelerator pedal as a volume control, like a loud pedal. On your radio, when you turn up the volume, you don't just go from 0 to tone deafening music. You do it very gradually. Keep it nice and smooth. Treating a car the same way gives the driver and passenger a smooth ride. It's the same with the brakes. Keep it nice and smooth. No jerking. Treat the controls kindly results in less wear and tear and lower running costs, which we can't ignore in this day and age. By taking in information and processing it correctly, we can continually consider our position on the road so we're safe. We're smooth, we're able to adjust our speed to deal with hazard or hazards ahead. Changing gear enables us to have the required amount of power to be applied so that we can then accelerate away after the hazard is past. So we're dealing with it progressively. So in conclusion, what I'd say is by having a system with which you can deal with hazards on the roads, you become more aware of your surroundings. You're not a reactive driver. You're a driver with a plan, and it's a plan you can use in every road situation. You know that whatever happens out there on the road, you've got the skill to handle it, rather than with being worried about every single thing that might happen to you when you go out. But all this comes as a result of practice and practicing this system of motor car control. So that was the end of the where are we at? One second. Any questions? Please feel free to unmute and challenge.
One of the things that bothers me is the bad driving at roundabouts, particularly Charlie Brown's, for example, where drivers are constantly coming to the roundabout in the wrong lane, particularly if they are, where they should be in the far right lane and they're in the middle lane when they're turning right and things like that. And the general roundabouts were bad driving generally.
Yes. A lot of people come along to advanced driving because they can't cope with things like you've just mentioned.
Yes.
It's upsetting, it's nerve-wracking, and we can't do much about other people's driving. But what we try and teach is a form of defensive driving. So if you know what's happening, you can keep yourself safe. By driving in a respectable, courteous manner, you can affect the way other people drive. You can't help the tearaway who turns up at a roundabout in a lane which you would normally use for going all the way around, and then he cuts you up. Yeah. But you can be aware that there is somebody to your right who's driving erratically, or you've seen him come up quickly behind you, and then you could anticipate that he might do something strange. That's why when I refer to driving a road you go on every day, you're particularly careful because you know things can happen. Yes, Sally.
How useful doing an advanced course is one of these assessment courses for a mature person, since you're talking to mature people?
Well, we do assessment drives for people. I think there's a relatively small charge, and the Institute of pardon?
£49.
Yeah, the Institute of Advanced Motorists encourages people who want that. They take into account the fact that the person who requests it may have exactly those issues that they need to just have their driving assessed. It can be an hour or maybe even longer, and they're very user friendly. They'll watch how you drive. They will give you some immediate feedback. They might have might stop and have a chat with you, explain to you some new ideas that you hadn't considered. They're very useful. You don't have to do the full driving course. It may just be that there are a few things that you need to concentrate on or practice.
Do you be a precursor to people who are 70 and they have to renew their license?
Yes. There's no automatic obligation that you will lose your license, but there was some talk just a week ago that for people who are forbidden from driving over the age of 70 because of the condition, that they may accept driving under certain restrictions. But that's for people who have been told not to drive over the age of 70. It could be 80, 90-year-olds. But listen, you're not going to lose anything by it. You'll pay your £49, you'll get your money's worth. And in fact, I've never heard of anybody who's done the IAM course who felt they've not had excellent value for money. I'm not doing a specific selling job here, but for the fee that it costs to join the Institute, you get unlimited training from your local group until you have passed the test. And some people that could be 6 months, 8 months. In others, it could be more than a year. Everybody's different, so there's no surefire way to do it. I did actually have the pleasure of training somebody who had never done his advanced test, but he was a car engineer, and he actually instructed. He worked for Nissan, and he instructed mechanics and drivers at dealerships how to drive their four-wheeled vehicles off-road. Now, he came to the table with a tremendous amount of knowledge about cars. He was extremely competent. I think I just had 2 sessions with him, and it actually covered the use of automatic gears, because you can go through a whole career of driving with an automatic and never do anything except remain in drive. But as I mentioned briefly before, if you're being examined by an instructor, by an examiner, and he sees that you know how to use the manual facility on your automatic car by changing down, it will give you far more points with the examiner, because he knows that you understand how to use your automatic gearbox correctly. You could go down a very steep hill, keep your foot on the brake the whole time. But by using the gears, you would be able to keep the car under better control. That's really what it's about.
John,
Yes.
Just a quickie. My wife, Carol, she took, when I did my advanced motoring, Carol did her improvement,
Refresher course.
a refresher course before.
And that was enormously helpful with Paul Bendon. And having driven for many years at that point, I didn't feel completely comfortable driving. And Paul gave me about, I don't know, 6 or 7 lessons, and they were incredibly helpful.
I've heard very good stories about Paul Bendon.
Thank you.
No, he's here.
Most of them are what he told me himself. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, listen, I don't know too much about Paul's actual driving background. I know he does instruct people and
I work for the IAM.
For the IAM. You're not employed by the IAM, are you?
I am. Yeah. Well,
Oh, you are?
I'm a qualified instructor.
Yes.
And I and I do work for the IAM doing company work and
Yes.
fleet training. And
Okay, so we're on the same team.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was going to wear my T-shirt for you, but I didn't.
Well, the one thing I like to ask, they're all the instructors. Do they teach people how to give a warning before they turn? Because when I was brought up in 15th of September 1951, when I passed my driving test, we had a word called HIG. Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard that expression.
Hand indicator gear.
Yeah.
There's no automatic. But today, as you approach the corner, you see someone who's just on the corner putting their lights on as they're turning, not for warning. They're going to turn.
Yeah, well, use of indicators for advanced driving is a very interesting topic, and I've had many discussions with people. The thing is, when we consider overtaking, we have a system. There's lots of acronyms, lots of 3-letter acronyms and 4-letter acronyms in advanced driving, and one of them is TUG, T-U-G, take, use, give information. So we take in information, we use that information, and we give information. We may give information by touching the brakes very slightly to let the car behind know we're slowing down at a slow pace.
Absolutely.
We might use the indicators to let somebody know that who's coming out of a junction that we're going to make that turn, and also for any pedestrians that are in the area. But the thing that a lot of people can't get their head around is that if there's nobody around, no cars, no people, why indicate? The reason you're going to say you indicate is because it's a habit. You could be driving along Broadwalk, Sally, there's no cars coming, and you'll indicate that you're turning into your drive. Are you doing that for yourself?
When I go to my garage, I put my indicator on before I get there to give warning that I'm going into it.
Are there cars around when you do that?
Does it matter?
They might be. They just might come around a corner.
Yeah, does it
I'm
matter?
giving you the situation. This is where the discussion comes in. I'm giving you the situation that there's nobody around. Oh, excuse me. Hello. The thing is, if you think there's somebody who will benefit from that signal, give it. You could argue it's better to give than not to give, but if it's not going to be a benefit, it's just using your brain power unnecessarily. That time where you're thinking about indicating, actually not thinking about indicating, you could put towards actually maneuvering the car better, being in the right position. So as my wife will notice, I very often I indicate if it's necessary, and I don't indicate when it's not necessary. I won't necessarily indicate when I'm on a roundabout if there's cars that aren't going to take any benefit from it. Doesn't make any difference. If I come to a T-junction in a narrow country road, there's no benefit to the driver behind whether I indicate to the left or the right, because he can't get past me. But my indicator may be useful to somebody who's coming from either side. He might just see my indicator flash. So I take into account those conditions. Otherwise, I just get on with the drive, keep the car moving. If there's people there, obviously I stop.
How do you overcome, for example, I'm coming home, there is a car, I want to turn into my drive and a car is coming down. They think I'm going to turn right into Melford Grove, but in actual fact, I want to turn into number 5. So they come very close to the entrance to number 5. And you pass. So I can go past them. I need to have a big sign on the front that flashes up, turning into number 5.
I do this.
That's a very good point. I can't really answer that because I'm not there in the car with you. What I would say is it's a question of using your judgment at the time. There will necessarily be occasions that aren't covered in any session that you might take.
Yeah,
but
normally I would stop. I would pull in to the left of where I would be.
Well, yeah, that's a good way of dealing with it. I can't say there's a right way and wrong way of doing that. So long as your intentions are clear. You know, I drive motorbikes, ride motorbikes. When I come to a junction, a T-junction, I'll position my bike so it's very clear to the vehicle behind or those on the road which way I'm going, if there's space. I'll keep the bike to the left or to the right. So cars coming behind know that they can turn the opposite way. I made a clear signal to them without necessarily indicating. So positioning your car will help other road users know exactly what you're doing. You're giving information. Ivor, you had a question.
Yeah, well, first of all, John, thanks for a really interesting session. Sally mentioned earlier cycling and the Epping New Road, and I've stopped cycling on the Epping New Road. It's an absolute nightmare, apart from the fact that cycle lanes run out into nowhere, and you suddenly find you either go up the curb or you stay on the road. You don't know what to do. But I just have this theory that if you haven't cycled, you don't really appreciate the needs of cyclists. And drivers can read about giving sufficient room and what have you, but I would make everybody cycle before they drove.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I'm like you, I've done a lot of cycling. I avoided doing road cycling when my son started to ride a bike, because I just felt it was too dangerous. So I only ride off-road. But it's interesting, in France, it's very common for young people to ride mopeds or scooters or motorbikes. So when they get older and just restrict themselves to driving cars, they have a much better understanding of the needs of motorcyclists and cyclists than they do in this country. There was some report done a couple of years ago where the authorities felt that drivers who see a cyclist who is not wearing a helmet as being more able to take care of themselves and therefore less in need of help from the driver than somebody who's wearing a helmet. But I've been riding through a refuge in the road along Epping and had cars pass me whilst we're both going through the refuge instead of waiting. So they pass you a few inches away. The only thing I can say is, as a driver, you've got to make allowances for people who are more vulnerable than yourself.
What about people like me who can't ride a bike?
Well, then that's all the more reason for you to consider those that can.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just been said about people learning by riding a bike, first of all. I can't ride a bike.
Oh, yeah, well then, obviously, if you can't ride it, you can't ride it. I mean, there are some, maybe, you know, if there's an individual with only one leg, he might find it quite difficult, but he can still appreciate the situation. Yeah. The fact is, we try and drive courteously with consideration for vulnerable road users. As it happens, I do know a one-legged cyclist and a one-legged motorcyclist, but there we go. In fact, the one-legged driver I knew, I worked with this chap. He'd lost his right leg quite some years before, and he had his car converted so that the pedal that was on the right was actually his brake pedal, and the pedal on his left was the accelerator. And he went to the Savoy Hotel in the Strand, and he got out the car, he parked, and one of the young men there said, "I'll park it for you, sir." Pressed what he thought was the brake, because it started to move, it was an automatic, and he went straight through the revolving doors. So he didn't really have time to tell him that the pedals were the wrong way around. But you know, there are very few handicaps to people driving these days.
I had a conversation with an advanced examiner who wasn't told at the beginning of the test that the pedals of the client's car was switched round, and the examiner almost freaked out.
Well, I can tell you, I had a national observer test with an observer on a motorbike, and he kept part of the bike hidden because he didn't want me to see that it was an automatic bike and didn't have a clutch lever. And I said to him while we were riding along, and I had to observe what he was doing, I said, "I've noticed you're not changing gear very much." And he said, oh, I wonder why. And then I noticed that he had this automatic bike. And I said, oh, I didn't see that before because you were standing in front of it. He said, you could have asked me to move. So, there's plenty of anecdotes about that sort of thing. But, I used to be a very ardent supporter of driving manual cars. I felt automatic cars were not the thing to do, and it was something for very elderly people. But the way automatic car systems work now, they're so advanced and they're so quick. You can't change gear as quickly in a manual car as you can in most of the automatics now. And even if you've got the paddles like the racing drivers have, you're probably much better off with an automatic these days.
Did you drive a pre-select gear?
Yeah, I've got. I tend to drive in drive, but there are times when I'm on my own and doing some driving practice when I'll utilize the gear function. I've got the paddles on the steering wheel, so it's quite easy to change it up and down, very quick. But I think the automatic option on some of these cars now is even better than doing it by.
And I know you obviously you know how to double declutch.
I do know how to double declutch. It's something I taught myself some years. Actually, I was shown how to do it by my father, but it's not really necessary these days. The sort of gearboxes that we have. It's
Well, the ref we used to drive.
Had to do before they had synchromesh gears, where all the gears join nice and easily with a clutch. You had to synchromesh. You had to double declutch to allow the gear change. You can still do it, but it's a technique that's not often used now, except by enthusiasts like Gerald.
I've driven some funny old things like Lee Francis, and also there was a Volkswagen van with the gear lever behind the left hand. So you had to put your hand behind your back to change gear.
Sounds very interesting. I have been out with a few old things myself, as my wife will testify.
He's been out with a few old things too.
Lovely, thank you so much.
Ivor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you mentioned vanishing point, and it's not a phrase that is familiar to me in the context of how you explained it, or your charming wife explained it.
I'll be happy to show you.
I just want to say, as a magistrate who sat on numerous traffic courts, hundreds over the years, the vanishing point to us was that point in time at which the bastard who drove into your vehicle cleared off.
Yeah. Well, strangely enough, the vanishing point or limit point of vision is a very, very useful skill to have if you are driving regularly or occasionally around twisty country lanes. You don't need it normal day-to-day driving. But I was just using the expression to show the sort of thing that advanced drivers are taught. So they've got it in their armory. So if you're driving along a country road and the bend that you're facing seems to come towards you very quickly, you know the bend is closing up and you need to go slower, because you've got to be able to stop in the distance you can safely see ahead of you. If you can't see far enough, or if you're going too quickly, then you could be in big trouble. And if it's a road where you have only got like one car or one bicycle, or one, actually it doesn't work so much with bicycles, or a motorbike. If it's a single track road and there are plenty around a bridge, if you can't see around the bend, you should be going at half the speed where you could normally stop, because there may be somebody doing the same thing coming around the other bend. So you need that extra time. So you slow down to give yourself more time.
The same thing applies to Humpback Bridge.
Humpback Bridge, exactly. And with a Humpback Bridge, I always tell people, keep over to the left, because there may be somebody who's not being so disciplined coming the other way. And normally it's the driver of a white van who's got a fag in his mouth, the mobile phone up to his ear, and he's steering like that. And when he goes over the bridge, the last thing he's thinking about is you coming the other way. So always expect the worst. Then you know you can be ready for it.
One of the biggest problems that I have is you're coming up to the Southend Road from a side road and you can't turn your head right enough to see any traffic coming across you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was just reading an article about older drivers and physical fitness.
Yes.
And people don't always realize how important as a driver it is that you should have some physical fitness and maneuverability. Exercises you can do might include those where you're twisting. If you've got some suppleness in your body, you've got some chest strength, it enables you to turn around to look at cars coming. If you've got restricted movement, that all has to be taken into account. Similarly, there are drivers who come along to advanced training who are hard of hearing. So we have to take that into account as well. And they have to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah, at the moment,
I've always said, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying at the moment I've got a severe neck problem.
Yes, so you have to, what I would suggest in that situation, Lawrence, is that you don't approach the Southend Road from a side turning. Try and approach it from a roundabout. So you've got better vision. There's a way around everything. Or position your car so that when you're coming up to that junction, you don't have to move your neck as much to see what is coming.
Yeah, I've always said to my family when I'm learning how to drive, this is a motto, expect the unexpected.
Exactly. And we often also say, there's what you can see, what you can't see, and what can reasonably be expected to happen. But there's a lot of things you have to keep in your mind. And none of this expertise and knowledge, as certainly Paul and Gerald and Gary, if he's still there, will know, is there's a lot of practice involved. It just does not happen overnight. The biggest problem people have when they join the IAM is being able to drive at 30 miles an hour for a long distance. They find it exceptionally hard. And I'm sure for those people who consider themselves very adept, they might be following a car through, let's say, Chigwell, Loughton and Abridge. He'll be doing 40 miles an hour all the way through. So he's speeding for part of it. He's speeding before he gets into Abridge. He's speeding through Abridge, but when he gets to the road that opens up, he'll still be doing the 40 miles an hour and has a queue of 10 cars behind him, and he's totally unaware. So having that discipline to stick to a speed limit when it's safe takes time to develop.
John, does the course include safe reversing out of your driveway when there are cars parked on both sides, to your left, to your right and opposite?
What it includes is for those people who are not particularly capable with reversing or aren't particularly talented with it, it can show you techniques as to how to reverse around corners, but there's no substitute for having a really good look and making sure. Now, there are specific corners I have practiced reversing on with students. I've actually had a driving session with a woman who passed her driving test and she wanted help with reversing. And I said, well, why didn't you deal with this with your previous instructor? She said he was too frightened to be in the car with me.
No, my concern is that reverse out of the drive, there's cars parked to the left and to the right, so you can't see up and you can't see.
Yeah, it's quite common. If you haven't got anybody with you, I mean, we had a situation like this ourselves, and Paula was in the car with me, is I tend to do it firstly extremely slowly.
Yeah.
If it is in reverse or whether it's even forward, I would put the hazard warning lights on so that it gives a very early warning to cars coming along that road you're reversing into, where there are cars parked, that you're there. So extreme caution and slow speed is what's required.
What we really want is parking restrictions.
Yeah, but obviously if you've got another person to help, so much the better. But you can only do that slowly.
Always very slowly.
Yeah.
Thank
okay.
I think it's time to go
If
and.
there's no more questions, I'll be happy to close the session. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John.
Thank you very, very much, John.
I love
Have a
that.
good year.